Hey everybody, for tonight's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about Bryan's alibi, his expert witness and the software that he uses, and also the prosecution's response to Bryan's alibi. So the defense filed Bryan's alibi in April of 2024. This is about a year and 3 months after Bryan was arrested. So essentially what they say is that on the night of the murders in the early morning hours of November 13th, Bryan was driving around south of Pullman, Washington and west of Moscow, Idaho, including the area of Alibi Park, as he often did in order to hike and run and or see the moon and the stars. They intend to offer testimony of an expert who will say that Bryan's mobile device was south of Pullman, Washington and west of Moscow, Idaho, and it did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman highway. And then they go on further to say that they'll offer additional information as to where Bryan was as the morning progressed once the state provides discovery that they're requesting that is now subject to an upcoming motion to compel. The first question I have is, why did it take a year and 3 months for the defense to file Bryan's alibi? In my opinion, if you're an innocent person and you're sitting in jail, you would have told your defense team early on that you were in another location, and they would have been investigating very thoroughly in order to find additional evidence to prove your innocence. They could have even revealed through discovery in the trial, and the prosecution could have been looking into finding evidence to prove Bryan's innocence, because if they were to find exculpatory evidence, they would have to disclose that. If you think about it, just like in Moscow, Idaho, there was video footage of a white Elantra all over the place around the time of the murders. If Bryan were in a different location, he could have told his team the exact route he took, and I guarantee you they would have been able to find video footage of a white Elantra along that route if he had actually been there. But unfortunately for Bryan, I don't think he was there, which is why he won't have the evidence to back up his alibi. I mean, on the night of the murders at Alibi Park, it was 28 degrees outside, cloudy, with ice and fog. So I really doubt Bryan was out running or hiking or looking at the moon and the stars. So the next question I have is a little bit old school. Those of you who have been following the case for a while will know what I'm talking about. So Bryan's alibi says that he would often drive around in the early morning hours in the countryside, including evenings in November. So obviously there's a good chance that he would have been driving around the countryside in the early morning hours in October. So I want to know where Bryan was on the evening of October 21st, 2022. You'll recall that is the night that Buddy the dog was killed, just 3 weeks before the murders and 3 miles away from the house on King Road. I don't know if we'll ever find out where Bryan was on October 21st, but I do have to wonder where he was that evening in the early morning hours. Another question I have regarding Bryan's alibi is whether or not they're saying Bryan was in Moscow, Idaho at all on the night of the murders. If they're saying that Bryan was not over there at any time, what they're saying is all of the cell phone pings, all of that video footage evidence that the prosecution is bringing to the table is incorrect, but their experts' data is correct. I think that's a critical piece of information because right now the defense is filing motions to compel discovery in regards to the video footage of Bryan in Moscow, Idaho. So could it be possible that their expert wants to look at all of this video footage and try to correlate it with what he comes up with in regards to his software's data in regards to Bryan's mobile device? So those are just a few questions I have right now regarding Bryan's alibi. Let's take a look really quick here at the prosecution's response to Bryan's alibi, and specifically this last paragraph. But they pretty much agree that Bryan's alibi is pretty vague. It's not really saying where he was at the time of the murders. And this last paragraph, what they say here is they're actually requesting the court enter an order denying the defendant any further opportunity to add to any purported claim of alibi and preclude testimony by anyone other than the defendant as to the defendant's absence from or presence at the scene of the homicide. And then they reference Idaho Code 19519. So if we look at this code, what they're saying here is because Bryan's defense did not comply with the demand for his alibi within the time frame that he was supposed to, they are requesting that any expert testimony be excluded, and that the only person who can testify where Bryan was when the murders occurred would be Bryan himself. All right, everybody, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the expert that's mentioned in Bryan's alibi, Cy Ray. There is something in his resume that I noticed that I wanted to point out, and then also take a look at a recent court ruling in regards to the software that he developed that I think is going to come into play in this case as well. So Cy Ray has a very impressive resume. He has an extensive military law enforcement background, a lot of data analysis, cellular analysis, and he developed this company called ZX that essentially uses software to analyze cellular data. It can be used in court cases, law enforcement investigations, things like that. So in his resume, if you read through it, there was one thing I noticed here. It says he has 10 years of expert witness and case consultant experience, and he mentions ZX. And it says all casework prior to November of 2023 was as a prosecution witness. So if you look at this court ruling recently here in Colorado, there was actually a case where a guy was accused of stalking, and the prosecution actually wanted to introduce Cy Ray as a witness and his software. And so what they said here is in September of 2022, the District Court of Larimer County ruled against the prosecution's proposed use of ZX and Trax-generated cell coverage maps, finding them unreliable and misleading. In addition, the court found that the software's proposed mathematical formula used to generate alleged coverage areas was untested and not peer-reviewed. It had no known error rate, and the company's founder who came up with the formula was not a credible witness. So in regards to this formula, if we take a closer look at this recent court ruling in Colorado, we can see what they're talking about. So ZX and Trax will create maps of coverage areas, and within the creation of these coverage areas, it uses this figure of 0.97 in the calculation. So Cy Ray has been asked how he came up with this number of 0.97, and he said that it's based off of over 3 million drive tests. Now, a drive test is when they drive around in the car and they can test the tower signal strength and coverage areas. So he's taken these past data points to determine this 0.97 number as being the best number that gives him the most accurate results. Now, unfortunately, the 0.97 figure isn't based off of any radio frequency principles, and Cy Ray admitted if he used a different number, say 0.95 or 0.96, the expected coverage area becomes too small.
No, not 6. I said 7.
So while Ray stands by his formula, it hasn't gained traction in the scientific community. The methodology and algorithm aren't published or subject to peer review, and they've been routinely labeled as junk science by the relevant scientific community. So that brings me back to Cy Ray's resume, where he says that up until November of 2023, he had only testified for the prosecution. I think there's a reason why he is now testifying for the defense teams. I think that the validity of his data has been called into question, and so now he's on the other side. It's going to be really interesting to see how Judge rules in regards to the prosecution's response to Bryan's alibi. We do have a hearing coming up next week. I can't wait to see the results. My next video will be coming out very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and make sure to hit the notification button so when I post a new video, you know it came out. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.